The radio crackled with Commander Halstead's voice, cold and absolute. Extraction denied. Hold position. Do not engage. Lieutenant Commander Soraya Okafor stared through her scope at 12 Navy SEALs pinned in a kill box 2 clicks north, Taliban fighters closing from 3 directions. She had 17 rounds left. Command had given their order, and in the next 90 seconds, she would have to choose between her career and their lives. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you know someone who has served in Afghanistan or faced an impossible choice while wearing the uniform. 47 minutes earlier, the mission had been routine. Soraya lay prone on a ridge overlooking the Tangi Valley, her cheek pressed against the stock of her rifle, watching the SEAL team move through the pre-dawn darkness toward the target compound below. The air was thin at this elevation, cold enough that each breath formed a small cloud before dissipating into nothing. Her spotter, Senior Chief Elena Vashchenko, lay beside her, rangefinder steady, voice a low murmur feeding distance and wind calculations. Overwatch established, Soraya said into her radio. 12 souls moving to target. I have eyes on all of them. The response came from the Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Chapman, 15 kilometers east. Copy, whisper. Maintain position and report. Whisper. That was her call sign. The other operators said she earned it because her targets never heard the shot that found them. But Soraya knew the truth ran deeper than that. She whispered because her father had taught her to speak softly and let her actions carry the volume. Lagos Police Captain Adebayo Okafor, killed in the line of duty when she was 16, protecting civilians during a bank robbery he had stumbled upon during his commute home. He never raised his voice either. He never had to. Below, the SEAL team advanced in perfect formation. Soraya tracked each man through her scope, her finger resting alongside the trigger guard rather than on it. She knew most of them. Chief Petty Officer Dominic Tesoro led the formation, his movements economical and precise after 3 combat deployments. 2 years ago, in a valley much like this one, Soraya had put a round through a Taliban fighter who had Tesoro dead to rights. He never forgot. When the DevGru commanders had questioned whether a woman belonged in their sniper program, Tesoro had been the loudest voice in her defense. Vashchenko shifted slightly beside her. Wind picking up from the southwest. 3 to 5 knots. Soraya made the mental adjustment automatically, a calculation so practiced it required no conscious thought. She had been making these calculations since she was 19 years old, first in training, then in theaters of operation that officially did not exist. The Navy had never formally acknowledged the classified integration program that allowed her to qualify as a SEAL sniper, but her record spoke for itself. 47 confirmed kills across 6 deployments. 0 friendly fire incidents. 0 missed shots that mattered. Except one. But she tried not to think about Yemen. The SEAL team reached the outer wall of the compound. Soraya watched them stack up, prepare for breach. Everything by the numbers. Everything exactly as it should be. Then the world exploded. The first RPG came from a tree line to the east, streaking toward the compound wall in a trail of fire. The SEALs scattered as the explosion threw debris across the courtyard. Before the dust had settled, gunfire erupted from 3 directions: north, east, and south. Muzzle flashes in the darkness like deadly fireflies, dozens of them, far too many for a chance encounter. This was an ambush, a coordinated, well-planned ambush. Soraya's heart rate remained steady, 62 beats per minute. She had trained for this, prepared for this, lived for this. Her scope swept across the chaos below, identifying targets, calculating distances, prioritizing threats. Contact. Tesoro's voice came through the radio, tight with controlled urgency. Heavy contact from multiple positions. We are pinned down. Request immediate fire support. Soraya's finger moved to the trigger. Whisper, the voice from the operations center cut in before she could speak. This was not Tesoro's channel. This was Commander Victor Halstead, the Joint Operations Commander at Chapman, a man who had never fired a weapon outside a qualification range. Hold your fire. We have not confirmed hostile identification. Soraya watched a machine gun team setting up on the eastern ridge, their weapon aimed directly at the SEALs huddled behind crumbling walls. Confirmed hostile identification. She could hear her own voice, calm and measured despite the fury building in her chest. I have eyes on enemy combatants. Requesting permission to engage. Negative, whisper. Hold your position. We are assessing the situation. Assessing. Soraya wanted to scream. 12 men were dying while Victor Halstead assessed the situation from an air-conditioned room 15 kilometers away. Vashchenko grabbed her arm, pointed. More fighters emerging from the southern tree line, moving to flank. At least 20, maybe more. Soraya keyed her radio again. Command, I count 23 confirmed hostiles closing on friendly positions. Request immediate authorization to engage. The pause stretched for 3 seconds. An eternity. Negative, Halstead's voice returned, each word delivered with bureaucratic precision. Rules of engagement require confirmed hostile identification before weapons release. Continue to observe and report. Through her scope, Soraya watched a SEAL fall, clutching his shoulder. She watched Tesoro drag him behind cover. She watched the Taliban fighters advance, methodical and confident, tightening the noose around 12 Americans who had trusted their chain of command to protect them. And she watched the situation assessment continue. The machine gun opened fire. Soraya watched the tracers streak across the valley, watched them chew into the mud brick wall where 3 SEALs had taken cover. Dust and debris exploded outward. One of the operators stumbled back, and for a terrible moment she thought he had been hit. But he recovered, pressing himself flatter against the crumbling barrier. Vashchenko was already calculating. Machine gun position, 832 meters. Wind holding at 4 knots southwest. Elevation adjustment plus 2.5. Soraya had the shot. She had the skill. She had 17 rounds and 12 lives, depending on her steady hands. What she did not have was permission. Command. She tried again, forcing her voice to remain level. I have clear shot on enemy machine gun position. Friendlies are taking effective fire. Requesting immediate authorization. Static. Then Halstead's voice, irritated now, as if she were a child asking for dessert before dinner. Whisper, I've already given you my answer. Rules of engagement are clear. We cannot authorize weapons release without confirmed hostile identification from multiple sources. Multiple sources. Soraya almost laughed. The muzzle flashes were not confirmation enough. The RPG that had nearly killed the entire team was not confirmation enough. The screaming and the blood and the dying were not confirmation enough for Commander Victor Halstead, safe in his operations center, drinking coffee while her brothers bled. She had known men like Halstead before, career officers who had never heard a shot fired in anger, who treated war like a chess game played from comfortable distance. They spoke of acceptable losses and strategic patience, while operators paid for their caution with their lives. Halstead had opposed her assignment to DevGru from the beginning, not because of her skills, which were beyond question, but because she was a woman, and women made his reports complicated, his briefings awkward, his promotion board uncomfortable. He had blocked 2 commendations that Tesoro had submitted on her behalf, had questioned her psychological fitness after every deployment, had suggested in a fitness report she was never supposed to see that female operators lack the emotional stability for sustained combat operations. Now, he was going to let 12 men die to prove a point about chain of command. Whisper, Tesoro's voice cut through her fury. His channel, not the command frequency. His voice tight, but controlled. The voice of a man who had stared death down before and refused to blink. We are in trouble here. They have us boxed. What is your count on hostiles? 23 confirmed, she replied. Possibly more in the tree line. They are moving to encircle. A pause. She could hear gunfire through the radio, the sharp crack of return fire from the SEALs, the deeper boom of the enemy weapons. Then Tesoro again, quieter now. Can you reach command? Get us some support? Her jaw tightened. I am trying, Dom. They are not listening. Another pause. Longer this time. When Tesoro spoke again, his voice had changed. Softer. The voice of a man making peace with something. Understood. Do what you can whisper. And if it goes bad, tell my wife I was thinking about her. The words hit Soraya like a physical blow. She had met Maria Tesoro once, and memorial service for a fallen operator. A small woman with kind eyes and 2 children hanging off her arms, looking at her husband like he was the whole world. Those children were 7 and 9 now, old enough to remember their father, old enough to understand loss. She would not let them become Gold Star children. Not today. Now she had breath in her body and rounds in her rifle. Vashchenko touched her arm. Movement on the southern flank. They are pushing. Soraya shifted her scope. The Taliban fighters moved with disturbing coordination, leapfrogging from cover to cover, closing the distance with professional discipline. This was not a random militia. These fighters had training, had leadership, had a plan, and their plan was working. She keyed the command frequency one more time. Commander Halstead, I am observing coordinated enemy assault on friendly position. 12 American operators will be overrun within 4 minutes if I do not engage. I am requesting, one final time, authorization to provide fire support. The response came faster this time, Halstead's voice sharp with warning. Lieutenant Commander Okafor, you have been given a direct order. You will hold your fire until proper authorization is obtained. Any unauthorized engagement will result in immediate court-martial proceedings. Do you understand? Soraya closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw other faces. 3 men in a different valley, a different country, 2 years ago. Yemen. A mission that went wrong. An ambush not so different from this one. She had called for permission to engage then, too. Had followed orders when it was denied. Had watched through her scope as the extraction team was cut down, one by one, while she held her fire like a good soldier. 3 flag-draped coffins. 3 families destroyed. 3 ghosts that visited her in the small hours of the night, asking why she had not saved them. She had promised herself never again. Had sworn on her father's memory that she would never let obedience become complicity in the death of good men. Vashchenko was watching her, reading the war playing out across her features. Whatever you decide, Elena said quietly, I am with you. Soraya opened her eyes. Below, the SEALs were falling back to a tighter perimeter. The wounded operator was being dragged by 2 of his teammates. Tesoro was directing fire, calm and steady, buying seconds with each carefully aimed shot. For minutes, maybe less. She had 17 rounds. She had 12 lives depending on her, and she had a choice to make. Her finger moved to the trigger. The memory came unbidden, as it always did in moments like this. Yemen, the Hadramaut Valley, a mission that existed in no official record, acknowledged by no government, mourned by no public memorial. She had been younger then, more certain that the system worked, that orders existed for reasons beyond her understanding, that obedience was its own form of courage. The extraction team had walked into an ambush almost identical to this one. Soraya had been in overwatch position, scope trained on the enemy fighters who were methodically destroying American operators below. She had called for authorization, had been denied, had called again and again while the situation deteriorated. And she had held her fire because that was what good soldiers did, because the chain of command existed for a reason, because somewhere in an operations center far away, someone with more information and more authority had made a decision, and her job was to trust that decision. Petty Officer First Class Jerome Washington. Chief Petty Officer Samuel Redhorse. Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas Chun. 3 names, 3 faces, 3 men who had trusted the system to protect them. She remembered the moment Chin fell. He had been trying to drag Washington to cover, refusing to leave a wounded teammate behind. The round took him in the neck. Through her scope, Soraya watched the life leave his eyes, watched him crumple over the man he had been trying to save, watched Redhorse make a desperate break for their position and catch 2 rounds in the chest before he made it 3 steps. And she had held her fire, following orders, being a good soldier. The official report called it a tragic loss, unavoidable casualties in a complex operational environment. The men who had denied her authorization faced no consequences. They had followed procedure. They had made defensible decisions based on available intelligence. They had done nothing wrong. Soraya knew better. She had done something wrong. She had obeyed. Never again. She had whispered those words over 3 graves at Arlington, standing alone in the rain after the other mourners had gone. Never again would she let procedure become permission for good men to die. Now she lay on a ridge in Afghanistan, watching history repeat itself, and the weight of that promise pressed down on her like a physical force. Vashchenko's voice pulled her back to the present. Southern Assault Team is 200 meters from friendly perimeter. They will be in grenade range in 90 seconds. Soraya blinked, clearing the ghost from her vision. The valley below had become a killing field. Muzzle flashes strobed in the darkness. Tracers crossed like deadly threads weaving a shroud. The SEALs had consolidated into a tight defensive position around a half-collapsed structure, but their perimeter was shrinking with every passing moment. She counted the enemy positions again. 23 confirmed. The machine gun on the eastern ridge was the most immediate threat, pinning down any attempt at movement. But the Southern Assault Team was the killing blow. Once they reached grenade range, it was over. No amount of skill or courage would save 12 men from fragmentation at close quarters. 3 minutes. Maybe less. "Command, this is Whisper." She heard her own voice as if from a great distance, calm and professional despite the chaos below. "Hostile forces are executing final assault on friendly position. I have clear shots on multiple high-value targets. Requesting immediate authorization to engage." She did not expect a different answer. She was not sure why she asked again. Perhaps because some part of her still wanted to believe in the system, still wanted to be a good soldier. Halstead's response destroyed that hope. "Whisper, this is your final warning. You're ordered to maintain position and hold fire. Any unauthorized engagement will result in immediate relief of duty and court-martial proceedings. Your career is on the line, Lieutenant Commander. Choose wisely. Choose wisely." As if her career mattered more than 12 lives. As if rank and pension and commendation were worth the price of watching good men die. Soraya thought about her father, about the day he had walked into that bank robbery, off-duty, unarmed, knowing exactly what it would cost him. He had not thought about his career, had not calculated the risks and rewards. He had seen people in danger, and he had acted, because that was who he was. Because protecting others was not a job or a duty or an order. It was a calling. She was his daughter. She carried his blood, his name, his legacy. And she would not dishonor that legacy by letting 12 Americans die while she followed orders. Her finger settled on the trigger. Her breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped to 58 beats per minute, the deep calm that always came before she did what she was born to do. Vashchenko watched her, reading the decision in the set of her jaw. Elena did not try to stop her, did not remind her of the consequences. She simply picked up her rangefinder and prepared to do her job. "Wind steady at 4 knots, Vashchenko said quietly. "Machine gun position still at 832. You have a shot." Soraya keyed her radio one final time. Not the command frequency, the open channel, the one every operator in the valley could hear. "Command, be advised." Her voice was steady as stone. "I am violating orders. Engaging hostiles now." She exhaled slowly, letting the tension flow out of her body. The crosshairs settled on the machine gunner's chest. She could see him clearly now, hunched behind his weapon, finger on the trigger, ready to kill Americans. Not today. She squeezed the trigger, and the world changed forever. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. 832 meters away, the machine gunner's head snapped back, and he crumpled over his weapon. The gun fell silent. 1. Soraya did not pause to admire her work. She was already shifting, acquiring the next target, a fighter sprinting toward the fallen machine gun to take over the position. Her crosshairs found him mid-stride. She squeezed. He tumbled forward and did not rise. 2. The radio erupted with Halstead's fury. "Whisper, you are relieved of duty immediately. Stand down. I repeat, stand down. You are in direct violation of a lawful order." Soraya reached up with her left hand and turned off the command frequency. The silence was a gift. Eastern Ridge, Vashchenko called out. Two more moving to the gun position. 798 meters. Wind unchanged. Soraya found them. Two fighters scrambling up the rocky slope, determined to get that machine gun back into action. She took the first one through the chest. The second dove behind a boulder, but she had already anticipated his movement. When he raised his head 3 seconds later to check if it was safe, her round was waiting for him. 3, 4. Below, the SEALs had recognized what was happening. Tessaro's voice came through on the team frequency, sharp with desperate hope. Whisper is engaging. All units, use the cover. Push to secondary position. The team began to move, taking advantage of the sudden silence from the Eastern Ridge. But the Southern assault force was still advancing, still closing the distance, still preparing to deliver the killing blow. Soraya swung her rifle south. The assault team had spread out, using terrain and vegetation for concealment. Professional movement. Disciplined spacing. Whoever had trained these fighters knew what they were doing. But Soraya knew what she was doing too. She found the point man first, a bearded fighter with an RPG launcher slung across his back. He was directing the others with hand signals, the leader of this particular element. Take out the leader, and the others would hesitate. Hesitation meant time. Time meant lives. The round took him just below the throat. He went down hard, and the fighters behind him scattered for cover. 5. One of them panicked, breaking from concealment to run back toward the tree line. Bad decision. Soraya tracked him for half a second, led his movement by 2 body lengths, and fired. He pitched forward into the dust and lay still. 6. Vashchenko was scanning with her spotter scope, calling out positions. 2 more behind the rock formation at 10 o'clock. One is trying to set up a mortar. A mortar that would end this fight in seconds. Soraya shifted her aim, searching for the telltale shape of the tube. There, a fighter wrestling with the base plate, trying to get it stable on the uneven ground. His partner was preparing the first round. She shot the man with the round first. He dropped it, and it rolled harmlessly down the slope. Then she shot the man with the base plate before he could react to his partner's death. 7. 8. The Southern assault had stalled. Fighters pressed themselves into whatever cover they could find, no longer advancing, no longer confident. They had expected to slaughter helpless Americans. They had not expected a guardian angel with a rifle and the will to use it. But the fight was not over. The northern element was still in position, still pouring fire into the SEAL perimeter. And Soraya could see movement in the tree line to the east. Reinforcements, maybe, or flankers trying to find a new angle of attack. Northern Ridge, she told Vashchenko, give me the priority targets. Her spotter shifted focus. 3 shooters in elevated position. 914 meters. They have the best angle on the friendlies. Soraya found them. 3 muzzle flashes winking from behind a natural rock barrier. Good position. Hard to hit, but not impossible. The first shot was clean. The fighter slumped forward over his weapon. 9. The second target reacted instantly, pulling back behind the rocks. Smart. But Soraya had seen where he had been. She knew approximately where he would be now. She waited, patient as death, watching for any sign of movement. 3 seconds. 5. 7. There, a shadow shifting. The barrel of a rifle emerging, searching for targets below. She fired. The shadow jerked and fell. 10. One shooter left on the northern ridge. He had seen what happened to his companions. He had watched 2 men die in the span of heartbeats. Now he faced a choice: fight or flee. He chose wrong. He rose from cover, spraying gunfire wildly toward the SEAL position, trying to do as much damage as possible before the sniper found him. It was brave in a way. Stupid but brave. Soraya ended his bravery with a single round. 11. Vashchenko let out a breath. Northern Ridge is clear. Southern element is suppressed. But we still have contacts in the eastern tree line. Soraya checked her count. 11 rounds fired. 6 remaining. And the fight was far from over. She scanned the eastern tree line, searching for targets. The fighters there had gone to ground, hiding in the shadows, waiting. They had seen what happened to everyone who showed themselves. They were learning. That was the problem with good enemies. They adapted. Movement caught her eye, not on the tree line, but closer, much closer. A fighter had somehow worked his way to within 100 meters of a seal perimeter, crawling through a drainage ditch that provided perfect concealment. He was rising now, an RPG on his shoulder, taking aim at the cluster of Americans behind the crumbling wall. Soraya did not think. She reacted. Her rifle swung toward the new threat, her finger already tightening on the trigger. But the angle was wrong. A piece of debris partially blocked her shot. She would have to thread the round through a gap no wider than a dinner plate at over 700 meters. She took the shot anyway. The round flew true for 700 meters, then clipped the edge of the debris. The deflection was minimal, barely a few centimeters, but at this distance a few centimeters was everything. The bullet sparked off rock and vanished into the darkness beyond the target. Mississippi. The fighter with the RPG did not flinch. He had not even heard the round pass. His finger was on the trigger, the launcher steady on his shoulder, the rocket aimed directly at the wall where Tesoro and 5 other SEALs had taken cover. Soraya's hands moved before her mind caught up. Eject the spent casing. Chamber a new round. Reacquire the target. But the debris was still there, still blocking the clean shot, and the fighter was half a second from firing. Vashchenko's voice cut through her focus. Lower angle. Use the drainage ditch. There's a gap at the base of the debris pile. Soraya dropped her aim 6 inches. There, a narrow channel where the debris met the ground, a sliver of open space no wider than her fist. Through it, she could see the fighter's legs, his boots planted in the dirt, his knees bent in a shooter's stance. Not a kill shot, but she did not need a kill. She needed a stop. She fired. The round passed through the gap and struck the fighter's left knee. He screamed and collapsed sideways, the RPG discharging harmlessly into the sky as he fell. The rocket streaked upward and exploded somewhere over the valley, a firework of wasted destruction. 12. Soraya let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. That was too close. Far too close. If Vashchenko had not seen the gap, if her hands had been a fraction slower, if any of 100 variables had shifted by the smallest degree, Tesoro and 5 other men would be dead. 5 rounds left, and the eastern tree line was still full of enemies. Nice shooting, whisper. Tesoro's voice on the team frequency, tight with gratitude and adrenaline. We're moving to secondary position now. Keep them off us. She wanted to respond. Wanted to tell him she would keep them safe no matter what it cost. But there was no time for words. Movement in the tree line demanded her attention. 3 fighters emerging from cover, sprinting toward a rocky outcropping that would give them a clear angle on the SEAL's new position. They moved in a staggered formation, making it harder to hit all 3 before one reached safety. Soraya chose the lead runner. He was the fastest, the most likely to make it to cover. She tracked his movement, calculated his speed, and fired 2 body lengths ahead of where he was. The round met him mid-stride. He went down in a tumble of limbs. 13. The second fighter dove for cover behind a fallen tree. The third kept running, committed now, too close to the outcropping to stop. Soraya tracked him, but he was fast, and the angle was changing with every step. She fired. The round caught him in the hip, spinning him around. He crashed into the rocks and lay still, not dead but out of the fight. 14. 3 rounds left, and the fighter behind a fallen tree was still a threat. She waited. Patience was a sniper's greatest weapon. The fighter would have to move eventually, would have to peek out, check his surroundings, try to advance or retreat. When he did, she would be ready. Second crawl by. 10, 20, 30. Vashchenko tapped her arm and pointed. Look, Eastern Ridge. New contacts. Soraya shifted her scope. Her stomach dropped. For more fighters had appeared on the ridge where she had killed the machine gun team earlier. They had worked their way up from the far side of the valley, out of her line of sight, and now they were setting up a new position. One of them was assembling another machine gun, pulling it from a canvas bag with practiced efficiency. If that gun got operational, the SEALs would be pinned again. All the progress she had made, All the lives she had saved would be erased in a spray of automatic fire. But she only had 3 rounds, and there were still enemies in the tree line, behind the fallen log, scattered across the valley floor. 3 rounds were not enough. They have to be enough. She turned her rifle toward the eastern ridge. The fighter assembling the machine gun was working quickly, his hands moving with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. 20 seconds, maybe less, and the weapon would be ready to fire. Soraya aimed. The distance was 847 meters. The wind had shifted slightly, now coming from the west at 6 knots. She made the adjustments automatically, trusting the instincts that had been honed over 15 years of training in combat. She fired. The round struck the machine gun itself, shattering the receiver. The fighter scrambled backward, unharmed but disarmed. 15. 2 rounds left. The other fighters on the ridge were diving for cover, but one of them had a radio pressed to his ear, calling for reinforcements, probably, or coordinating with the remaining fighters in the valley. Either way, he was the command and control element. Take him out, and the enemy lost cohesion. Soraya found him in her scope. He was partially concealed behind a boulder, only his head and shoulders visible. A small target at 800 meters. But she had made harder shots. She exhaled, steadied, squeezed. The round flew true. The fighter dropped. 16. 1 round left. 1 round between 12 Americans and however many enemies still lurked in the valley below. And then she heard the worst sound imaginable. Whisper. Tessero's voice, strained with pain he was trying to hide. I am hit. The words hit Soraya like a round to the chest. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to keep her hands steady on the rifle. How bad? She asked, her voice betraying nothing of the fear clawing at her insides. Tessero's response came between ragged breaths. Took one in the side. Through and through, I think. I can still move. But there is a shooter in the drainage ditch about 50 meters out. He's got me pinned. Every time I try to shift, he puts rounds over my head. The drainage ditch. The same one where the RPG fighter had hidden. Soraya swung her scope toward it, searching for the threat. But the ditch was deep, carved by years of seasonal flooding, and the fighter inside was invisible from her angle. She could see Tessaro, though. He was pressed against the base of the wall, one hand clamped over his right side, blood seeping between his fingers. The other SEALs had formed a protective perimeter around him, but they could not reach him without exposing themselves to the shooter in the ditch. I cannot see him, Soraya said. He is below my angle. Vashchenko was already working the problem. The ditch runs northeast for about 80 meters before it opens up. If he moves toward the team, he will have to exit at the far end. But if he exits at the far end, Soraya replied, he will be within grenade range. 1 round. 1 enemy she cannot see, and Tessaro bleeding out behind a crumbling wall. Think. There had to be a solution. There was always a solution. Vashchenko suddenly stiffened beside her. Wait, I am picking up radio traffic. She pressed her earpiece closer, listening intently. Her face went pale. Soraya, you need to hear this. She handed over the secondary radio, the one tuned to monitor enemy frequencies. Soraya pressed it to her ear and heard voices speaking Pashto, rapid and urgent. But beneath the enemy chatter, there was something else. A frequency bleed. American voices. She adjusted the dial slightly, and the voices became clearer. Commander Halstead and someone else. Lieutenant Ardmore, his aide. The extraction birds are holding at Checkpoint Alpha, Ardmore was saying. They are requesting updated authorization to proceed. Halstead's response made Soraya's blood freeze. Tell them to continue holding. We are assessing the situation. Sir, with respect, we have confirmed hostile contact. The team is taking casualties. Standard protocol requires immediate extraction authorization. A pause. Then Halstead again, his voice cold and deliberate. Lieutenant, I am aware of the protocol. I'm also aware that Lieutenant Commander Okafor has directly violated my orders and compromised this entire operation. If I authorize extraction now, it validates our insubordination. It sets a precedent that any operator can ignore the chain of command whenever they feel like playing hero. Ardmore's voice was hesitant. "Sir, there are 12 men down there, and there will be investigations afterward," Halstead continued. "Reviews. Questions about why I did not maintain operational control. Questions that could affect my next assignment." He paused. "The extraction will be authorized when I determine it is appropriate. Not before." Soraya pulled the radio away from her ear. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. He knew. Halstead knew that men were dying, knew that extraction could save them, and he was holding it back to protect his career, to punish her for defying him. Vashchenko had heard enough through the shared earpiece. Her face was a mask of controlled fury. "He's going to let them die," she whispered, to make a point. "No." Soraya's voice was steel. "He is not." She turned back to her scope, forcing the anger down, channeling it into focus. One round, one chance. She had to make it count. The fighter in the ditch was still invisible, but he would have to move eventually, would have to advance on the wounded SEALs or retreat when he realized his support was gone. Either way, he would have to show himself, unless she could force him to move. "Tesoro," she said into the radio, "I need you to do something for me." His response was weaker than before. The blood loss was taking its toll. "Name it. Draw his fire. Make him shoot. I need to see his muzzle flash." A pause, then a pained laugh. "You want me to make myself a target? Just for a second. I will do the rest." Another pause, longer this time. When Tesoro spoke again, his voice was steady despite the pain. "On your count, whisper." Soraya settled her crosshairs on the section of ditch where the fighter had to be. She slowed her breathing, steadied her heartbeat, became perfectly still. "3," she said. "2, 1, now." Tesoro moved, a deliberate shift, exposing himself for just a fraction of a second. The fighter in the ditch reacted instantly, rising just enough to take the shot. Muzzle flash, 847 meters. A 2-inch gap between the rocks he was using for cover. Soraya saw his trigger finger. Just his finger and a sliver of his weapon. Nothing else. It was impossible. No sniper in the world could make this shot. The gap was too small, the distance too great, the margin for error measured in millimeters. But Soraya was not just any sniper. She was Whisper, and she had made a promise. She fired her last round. The bullet crossed 847 meters in less than a second. It threaded through the 2-inch gap between the rocks, passed through the space where the fighter's hand gripped his weapon, and struck his trigger finger with surgical precision. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the dirt. The fighter screamed and fell back into the ditch, clutching his ruined hand. He was alive, but he was done fighting. 17. Soraya let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in her lungs for hours. Her hands were trembling now, the adrenaline finally catching up with her body. She had done it. 17 shots, 12 lives. The valley fell silent. For a long moment, nothing moved. The remaining Taliban fighters, those few who had survived, were melting back into the tree line. They had come to slaughter Americans. Instead, they had watched their comrades fall one by one to a ghost they could not see, could not fight, could not escape. Their courage was broken. Tesoro's voice crackled over the radio, weak but alive. "Whisper." His voice caught. "I do not know how you made that shot. I do not think anyone does. But you saved us. You saved all of us." Soraya wanted to respond, but the words would not come. The enormity of what she had done, what she had risked, was beginning to settle over her like a weight. She had defied a direct order from a superior officer. She had violated the chain of command. She had ended her career with 17 squeezes of a trigger, and she would do it again in a heartbeat. "Get him stabilized," she finally said. Extraction should be coming. Should be. But she knew Halstead was still holding the birds, still punishing her, still letting men bleed to prove his authority. Vashchenko touched her arm. "We need to move. If any of them have radios, they know our position now." Soraya nodded. She broke down her rifle with practiced efficiency, securing it across her back. Her body moved on autopilot while her mind raced through the implications of the intercepted communication. Halstead had known. had received intelligence suggesting a possible ambush and had sent the team anyway. Had prioritized his paperwork, his timeline, his career over 12 American lives. And now he was going to court-martial her for saving them. They descended from the ridge in careful bounds, covering each other's movement, watching for any remaining threats. The valley floor was littered with bodies. Soraya did not count them. She did not need to. 17 shots. She knew exactly how many she had killed. When they reached the seal perimeter, the scene was controlled chaos. Corpsmen were working on Tesoro and 2 other wounded operators. The rest had formed a defensive ring, weapons trained outward, ready for any renewed assault. But the fight was over. Everyone knew it. Tesoro was propped against a wall, his face pale beneath the grime and blood. A pressure bandage was wrapped around his midsection, already soaked through with red. But his eyes were clear, and when he saw Soraya approaching, something like a smile crossed his face. "There she is," he said, "the woman who does not miss." Soraya knelt beside him, checking his bandage with professional detachment, even as her heart clenched at the sight of his wound. "I missed once tonight." Tesoro laughed, then winced at the pain it caused. "That shot at the debris pile. I saw the spark. Thought we were done. So did I. But you adapted. Found another way." He reached out and gripped her arm with surprising strength. "That is what makes you what you are, Whisper. You do not quit. You do not accept impossible. You just find a different angle." She covered his hand with hers. "Save your strength. Extraction is coming." His expression darkened. "Is it?" "I heard the radio traffic. Halstead is sitting on the birds." Soraya's jaw tightened. "He will release them. He has to. He cannot let 12 SEALs die on American soil while helicopters sit 15 minutes away. Not even he is that stupid." But even as she said it, she was not sure she believed it. 10 minutes passed. 15. The wounded grew weaker. Tesoro's breathing became shallow, his grip on her arm loosening. The corpsmen did what they could, but they needed a surgical suite, blood transfusions, equipment they did not have. Vashchenko appeared at her shoulder. "I have been monitoring the command frequency. Halstead is still refusing to authorize." Soraya stood. The rage she had suppressed during the firefight came roaring back, white-hot and righteous. She keyed her radio to the command frequency, the one she had turned off an hour ago. "Commander Halstead," she said, her voice flat and cold. "This is Lieutenant Commander Okafor. I have 12 operators at this position, 3 of them critically wounded. You will authorize extraction immediately, or I will personally ensure that every military news outlet, every congressional oversight committee, and every veteran organization in this country knows that you let SEALs die to protect your promotion." Silence on the radio. Then Halstead's voice, dripping with contempt. "You are threatening a superior officer, Lieutenant Commander. That is another charge for your court-martial." "It is not a threat, sir. It is a promise. And I have witnesses. I have recordings. I have everything I need to end your career far more thoroughly than you can end mine." Another silence. Longer this time. Then, finally, his voice returned. Clipped. Furious. Defeated. Extraction authorized. Birds inbound. Estimated arrival 12 minutes. Soraya turned off the radio and looked down at Tesoro. He was smiling despite the pain. "Remind me," he whispered, "never to make you angry." She squeezed his hand. "Just stay alive, Dom. That is all I ask." The helicopters arrived 11 minutes later, their rotors cutting through the dawn air like the beating wings of angels. Soraya watched them descend, watched the medics rush out with stretchers, watched Tesoro and the other wounded being loaded with urgent efficiency. Only when the last SEAL was aboard did she allow herself to climb into the bird. Vashchenko sat beside her, silent and steady as always. Neither of them spoke during the flight back to FOB Chapman. There was nothing to say. They both knew what was waiting. The helicopter touched down on the landing pad, and Soraya saw him immediately. Commander Victor Halstead stood at the edge of the tarmac, flanked by 2 military police officers. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his dress uniform pristine despite the early hour. He had taken the time to make himself presentable for this moment. He wanted her to know this was official. This was final. Lieutenant Commander Okafor, he said as she stepped off the helicopter. You are hereby relieved of duty pending investigation. You will surrender your weapon and accompany these officers to confinement quarters. Soraya unslung her rifle and handed it to one of the MPs. She did not resist, did not argue. There was no point. Halstead had the authority, and she had made her choice. But as she walked past him, she paused, looked him in the eye. 12 men are alive because of what I did tonight, she said quietly. 3 of them are on their way to surgery right now. They have families, children, people who love them and need them to come home. Halstead's expression did not change. And you violated a direct order. You undermined the chain of command. You made a mockery of military discipline. I save lives, sir. You saved your conscience, he replied, at the expense of everything this uniform represents. They stared at each other for a long moment. 2 wills colliding. 2 visions of what duty meant. Then Halstead nodded to the MPs, and they led Soraya away. Her confinement quarters were a small room in the administrative building, barely large enough for a cot and a desk. A single window looked out over the motor pool. The door locked from the outside. Soraya sat on the cot and stared at the wall. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. She had known the cost when she pulled that trigger, had accepted it, but knowing and feeling were different things. Her career was over. 15 years of service, of sacrifice, of proving herself in a world that had never wanted her. All of it ending in a locked room while the man who had nearly let 12 Americans die walked free. She thought about her father, about the choice he had made in that Lagos bank, the choice that had cost him everything. He had not hesitated, had not calculated the risks. He had seen people in danger, and he had acted because that was who he was. She was his daughter. She had done the same, and she would not apologize for it. Hours passed. Day turned to evening, turned to night. No one came to see her. No one told her what was happening. She was alone with her thoughts and her memories and the faces of 17 men she had killed to save 12. Just after midnight, a knock at the door broke the silence. Soraya rose as a guard unlocked it, and Vashchenko slipped inside. You should not be here, Soraya said. Vashchenko shrugged. I have friends in the MP Corps. They owed me favors. She pulled a small device from her pocket and held it up. Besides, I brought you something. What is it? The recording. Vashchenko's eyes gleamed with something between satisfaction and fury. The intercepted communication between Halstead and Ardmore. The one where he admits he knew about the ambush indicators. The one where he says he is holding extraction to protect his career. Soraya stared at the device. You saved it. Of course I saved it. Did you think I would let that bastard bury the truth? But this is classified intelligence. If anyone finds out you have it, you could face charges too. Vashchenko sat down on the cot beside her. Then we faced them together. I did not watch you sacrifice everything just to let Halstead walk away clean. She pressed the device into Soraya's hand. This is your weapon now. Whisper. Use it. Soraya turned the device over in her fingers. Such a small thing. A few minutes of audio. But it contained the truth. And the truth was more powerful than any rifle. The tribunal convenes in 3 days. Vashchenko continued. Halstead has already filed formal charges. Willful disobedience. Violation of direct orders. Conduct unbecoming. He is pushing for a dishonorable discharge and prison time. Of course he is. But there is something else. Vashchenko leaned closer. Lieutenant Ardmore has been asking questions. Quiet questions. He was in the room when Halstead made that call. He heard everything, and I do not think he is comfortable with what he heard. Soraya looked up. You think he might testify? I think he is a young officer who believed in the system until he watched his commander let men die. Vashchenko stood. I think his conscience is eating him alive, and I think if someone gave him a reason to do the right thing, he might take it. The door opened again, the guard signaling that time was up. Vashchenko moved toward it, then paused. Whatever happens, she said, I want you to know something. What you did out there, those 17 shots, that was the most extraordinary thing I have ever witnessed. And I am proud to have been beside you for it. Then she was gone, and Soraya was alone again. But not helpless. Not anymore. She looked at the device in her hand. 3 days until the tribunal. 3 days to find out if the truth still mattered. The tribunal convened at 0800 in the base conference room. 3 senior officers sat behind a long table, their faces carefully neutral. Captain Elaine Westbrook of the JAG Corps presided, flanked by Colonel Marcus Dunn of Army Special Operations and Commander Patricia Sato of Naval Intelligence. They had been flown in specifically for this proceeding, officers with no connection to FOB Chapman, no loyalty to Halstead, no stake in the outcome beyond the truth. At least, that was the theory. Soraya sat at the defense table in her dress uniform, medals aligned precisely on her chest. Her military-appointed lawyer, Lieutenant Commander David Okonkwo, shuffled papers beside her. He was competent but pessimistic. He had told her as much during their preparation sessions. The evidence of her disobedience was irrefutable. The best they could hope for was leniency. Soraya had not told him about the recording. Not yet. She was waiting for the right moment. Commander Halstead sat at the prosecution table, resplendent in his own dress uniform, confidence radiating from every pore. Lieutenant Ardmore sat behind him, face pale and drawn, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. He had not looked at Soraya once since entering the room. Captain Westbrook called the proceedings to order and invited the prosecution to present their case. Halstead rose with theatrical gravity. He spoke for 20 minutes, painting a picture of a rogue operator who had endangered lives through reckless insubordination. He cited regulations. He quoted protocols. He presented radio logs that documented Soraya's repeated requests for authorization and his repeated, justified denials. Lieutenant Commander Okafor was given clear and lawful orders. Halstead concluded. She chose to ignore them. She chose to place her own judgment above the chain of command. If we allow this to stand, we tell every operator in the field that orders are optional, that discipline is negotiable, that the foundation of military structure can be discarded whenever an individual decides they know better. He sat down to silence. The 3 officers behind the table exchanged glances. Captain Westbrook turned to the defense table. Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo, your response. Okonkwo stood and delivered a workmanlike defense. He emphasized the lives saved. He highlighted Soraya's exemplary record. He argued that extraordinary circumstances sometimes required extraordinary judgment. But even Soraya could tell his heart was not in it. He was going through the motions, preparing for a loss. The tribunal called witnesses. 2 SEALs from the rescue team testified to Soraya's marksmanship, her courage, her role in their survival. Their gratitude was evident, but gratitude was not a legal defense. Halstead's lawyer dismissed their testimony as emotional, not procedural. Then Tesaro was wheeled in. He had refused to miss the tribunal, despite being 3 days out from surgery. His face was gray with pain, but his eyes were sharp. He wore his dress uniform over his bandages, medals gleaming. Chief Petty Officer Tesaro, Captain Westbrook said, "You were the team leader during the operation in question. Can you describe what happened from your perspective?" Tesaro spoke for 10 minutes. He described the ambush, the coordinated assault, the desperate situation, and he described what it felt like to watch his team dying around him while command refused to authorize support. "I have been in combat for 15 years, he said. "I have lost men before, but I have never in my entire career felt as helpless as I did in that valley. We were going to die. All of us. We knew it. We had made our peace with it." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. And then whisper came on the radio. She said she was violating orders. She said she was engaging. And she proceeded to deliver the most extraordinary display of precision shooting I have ever witnessed. 17 shots. 17 targets. She saved 12 lives that night, including mine. The room was silent. Even Halstead seemed momentarily affected. Captain Westbrook leaned forward. "Chief Tesaro, do you believe Lieutenant Commander Okafor made the right decision?" Tesaro met her gaze without flinching. "I believe I am alive because of her decision. I believe my wife still has a husband and my children still have a father because of her decision." He looked directly at Halstead. "And I believe that if she had followed orders 12 flag-draped coffins would be on their way home right now. Halstead shot to his feet. This is emotional manipulation. The witness is not qualified to assess command decisions. Captain Westbrook silenced him with a look. The witness has answered the question. She turned back to the room. Are there any other witnesses? Silence. Okonkwo shook his head. Soraya felt the moment slipping away. Tessero's testimony had been powerful, but it was not enough. They needed more. They needed the truth. She was about to stand, about to reveal the recording herself, when a voice spoke from the back of the room. I would like to testify. Every head turned. Lieutenant Ardmore was on his feet, his face pale but determined. He was shaking visibly, but his voice did not waver. Halstead's expression shifted from confidence to confusion to the first flicker of fear. Lieutenant, Captain Westbrook said carefully, "You are not on the witness list." "I understand, ma'am, but I have information relevant to these proceedings. Information that has not been presented." He swallowed hard. Information about Commander Halstead's conduct before and during the operation. The room erupted. Halstead shouted an objection. Okonkwo turned to Soraya with wide eyes. The three tribunal officers conferred in urgent whispers. Finally, Captain Westbrook raised her hand for silence. "Lieutenant Ardmore," she said, "approach the stand." Lieutenant Ardmore walked to the witness stand like a man approaching his own execution. His hands trembled as he took his seat, but when he raised his eyes to meet Captain Westbrook's gaze, there was steel behind the fear. Halstead was on his feet again. "Captain, this is highly irregular. Lieutenant Ardmore is my aide. Any testimony he provides would be privileged communication between a commander and his staff." Captain Westbrook's expression hardened. "Commander Halstead, if Lieutenant Ardmore has evidence of misconduct relevant to these proceedings, I am obligated to hear it." She turned to Ardmore. "Lieutenant, you understand that what you say here is under oath. You understand the potential consequences of your testimony." "Ido, ma'am." "Then proceed." Ardmore took a breath. On the morning of the operation, approximately 6 hours before the team was inserted, Commander Halstead received an intelligence briefing. I was present for that briefing. The intelligence officer presented intercepts suggesting possible hostile activity in the target area, indicators that suggested a potential ambush. The room went still. Soraya felt her heart pounding against her ribs. "What was Commander Halstead's response to this intelligence?" Captain Westbrook asked. Ardmore's voice was barely above a whisper, but every word carried. He dismissed it. He said the indicators were too vague to justify delaying the operation. He said that postponing the mission would create paperwork complications that could affect his quarterly performance review. Murmurs rippled through the room. Captain Westbrook raised her hand for silence. "Did Commander Halstead order any additional precautions based on this intelligence?" "No, ma'am. He ordered the mission to proceed as planned. And during the operation, when Lieutenant Commander Okafor requested authorization to engage hostile forces, were you present for Commander Halstead's decisions?" Ardmore nodded. "I was in the operations center the entire time." "Can you describe what happened?" The young lieutenant closed his eyes for a moment, as if steeling himself. Lieutenant Commander Okafor requested authorization multiple times. Each time, Commander Halstead denied her. His stated reason was unconfirmed hostile identification, but that was not his real concern. What was his real concern? Ardmore opened his eyes and looked directly at Halstead. His real concern was that authorizing engagement would validate Lieutenant Commander Okafor's judgment over his own. He said, and I quote, "If I let her shoot now, it proves she was right to question me." He was more concerned with maintaining his authority than with the lives of the men in that valley. Halstead erupted. "This is lies. This is fabrication. This officer is disgruntled and seeking to undermine my command." Captain Westbrook's voice cut through his outburst like a blade. "Commander Halstead, you will be silent or you will be removed from this proceeding." Halstead sank back into his chair, his face mottled with fury. Captain Westbrook turned back to Ardmore. "Lieutenant, these are serious allegations. Do you have any evidence to support them?" Ardmore reached into his uniform jacket and produced a small device. The same type of device Vashchenko had given Soraya 2 nights ago. A recording device. I made a copy of the Operations Center communications log, he said. Everything Commander Halstead said during the operation is on this device, including his comments about letting the team die to teach Lieutenant Commander Okafor a lesson about chain of command. The room exploded. Halstead lunged to his feet, shouting accusations of theft and treason. The MPs moved to restrain him. The tribunal officers banged for order. Through it all, Soraya sat motionless, watching the man who had tried to destroy her career crumble before her eyes. It took several minutes to restore order. When the room finally quieted, Captain Westbrook took the device from Ardmore and handed it to a technical officer. "We will verify the authenticity of this recording," she said. "In the meantime, Commander Halstead, you are hereby suspended from duty pending investigation." She looked at him with undisguised contempt. "If these allegations prove true, you will face charges far more serious than anything Lieutenant Commander Okafor has been accused of." Halstead said nothing. The arrogance had drained from his face, replaced by the hollow expression of a man watching his world collapse. Captain Westbrook turned to Soraya. "Lieutenant Commander Okafor, in light of this new evidence, this tribunal is recessed until the recording can be verified. However, I want to say something for the record." She paused, her eyes meeting Soraya's. "I have reviewed your service record. I have heard the testimony of the men whose lives you saved. And I have now heard evidence suggesting that your commanding officer not only failed in his duty, but actively impeded your efforts to protect American lives. Whatever the final outcome of these proceedings, I want you to know that your actions in that valley were nothing short of extraordinary." Soraya felt something loosen in her chest. Not vindication, exactly. Not yet, but something close to hope. "Thank you, ma'am," she said quietly. Captain Westbrook nodded. "This tribunal is recessed until 0800 tomorrow." She struck her gavel, and the room began to empty. Soraya remained seated as the chaos swirled around her. Tesaro caught her eye from his wheelchair and nodded once. Vashchenko appeared at her shoulder, a rare smile on her face. "You did it," Elena whispered. Soraya shook her head. "Not yet, but we are close." She watched as the MPs escorted Halstead from the room. He did not look back. Tomorrow, the truth would be confirmed. Tomorrow, justice would be served. But tonight, for the first time in days, Soraya allowed herself to breathe. The recording was authentic. The technical team confirmed it within hours, but Captain Westbrook had waited until the following morning to announce the findings. She wanted the full tribunal present. She wanted everyone to hear the truth. Soraya stood at attention as the verdict was read. "Lieutenant Commander Soraya Okafor," Captain Westbrook announced, "all charges against you are dismissed. This tribunal finds that your actions during the operation in question, while technically in violation of direct orders, were justified by extraordinary circumstances and the gross dereliction of duty by your commanding officer." Soraya kept her face neutral, but inside, something she had been carrying for days finally released its grip. Furthermore, Captain Westbrook continued, "This tribunal commends your exceptional skill, courage, and judgment under fire. Your actions directly saved the lives of 12 American service members. It is the recommendation of this tribunal that you be awarded the Navy Cross for valor in combat." The room erupted in applause. Tesaro was clapping from his wheelchair, tears streaming down his weathered face. Vashchenko stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, a satisfied smile playing at her lips. Even some of the MPs who had escorted Soraya to confinement were applauding. Captain Westbrook allowed the celebration for a moment before raising her hand for silence. As for Commander Victor Halstead, she said, her voice hardening, "The evidence presented to this tribunal reveals a pattern of conduct unbecoming an officer, dereliction of duty, and willful endangerment of personnel under his operational authority. Commander Halstead has been relieved of command effective immediately. He will face a general court-martial on charges including negligent homicide and obstruction of justice." Soraya glanced across the room to where Halstead sat, flanked by MPs. The man who had tried to destroy her was slumped in his chair, staring at nothing. His uniform, so pristine yesterday, was wrinkled. His face was gray. He had gambled everything on his authority, and he had lost. She expected to feel satisfaction, triumph, perhaps even vindication. Instead, she felt only a tired sadness. Halstead had been a naval officer for over 20 years. He had served his country, however imperfectly, and now his career, his reputation, his freedom were gone. All because he could not accept that sometimes the right decision came from someone other than himself. The tribunal concluded, and the room began to empty. Soraya found herself surrounded by well-wishers. SEALs from the rescue team clasped her hand, slapped her shoulder, spoke words of gratitude that blurred together in the noise. She accepted their thanks with grace, but her mind was elsewhere. Tesoro wheeled himself through the crowd and stopped in front of her. The others fell back, giving them space. So he said, "Navy Cross. Not bad for a night's work." Soraya shook her head. "I did not do it for medals, Dom. I know. That is why you deserve one." He reached out and took her hand. "Maria wants to meet you. Properly, I mean. Not a memorial service. She wants you to come for dinner when we get stateside. The kids want to meet the woman who brought their dad home." Soraya felt her throat tighten. "I would like that." "Good." He squeezed her hand. "Because you are family now, whisper, whether you like it or not. The Tesoros do not forget what you did. We never will." He released her hand and wheeled away, leaving Soraya standing alone in the emptying room. Vashchenko appeared at her side. "How does it feel?" Soraya considered the question. "Strange," she admitted. "I spent the last 3 days preparing to lose everything. Now I have to figure out what to do with everything I've been given." Vashchenko laughed. "I have some ideas, starting with a very long shower and a very large meal. Then maybe some sleep. You look terrible. Thank you for your honesty. Always." Vashchenko's expression softened. "But seriously, Soraya, what you did out there, what you stood for in here, it mattered. Not just to the men you saved. To everyone who wears this uniform. You showed them that doing the right thing is worth the cost. That courage is not just about pulling triggers. It is about standing up for what you believe, even when everyone with power tells you to stand down." Soraya looked at her spotter, her friend, the woman who had stood beside her through everything. "I could not have done it without you, Elena. The recording, the support, all of it." Vashchenko shrugged. "That is what partners are for. Besides, watching Halstead's face when Ardmore produced that device was worth any risk. I will treasure that memory forever." They walked out of the conference room together into the bright Afghan morning. The sun was warm on Soraya's face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on her shoulders had lifted. She did not know what came next, did not know where her career would take her or what challenges waited ahead. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had honored her father's memory. She had protected those who needed her. And she had proven to herself and to everyone watching that some principles were worth any price. That night, alone in her quarters, she pulled out a worn photograph. Her father in his Lagos police uniform, smiling that warm smile she remembered from childhood. She pressed the photo to her chest and whispered into the darkness, "I hope I made you proud, Papa." Somewhere, she knew, he was smiling. 3 months later, Soraya lay prone on a ridge in the Hindu Kush, her cheek pressed against the familiar stock of her rifle. The mountains stretched endlessly before her, snow-capped peaks glowing amber in the early morning light. Below, a new SEAL team moved through a valley toward a compound where a high-value target was believed to be hiding. Vashchenko lay beside her, rangefinder steady, voice a low murmur. 12 souls moving to target. Wind from the northeast at 6 knots. Visibility excellent. Some things never changed, but other things had changed. Everything had changed. The Navy Cross now hung in a shadow box in her quarters back at Virginia Beach, alongside a letter of commendation signed by the Secretary of the Navy himself. She had been promoted to full commander, the youngest woman to hold that rank in DevGru history. And she had been given her pick of assignments. She had chosen this. Back in the field, back in Overwatch, back where she belonged. "Whisper, this is actual." The voice on the radio was calm and professional. Commander Nathan Cross, her new operational commander. He had read her file before their first meeting, had looked her in the eye and said, "I hear you have a habit of violating orders when lives are at stake." Then he had smiled. "Good. I want officers who think for themselves. Just try to keep me informed before you start any wars." She liked him. More importantly, she trusted him. "Whisper copies, actual," she replied. "I have eyes on all friendlies." Proceeding to phase line alpha. "Copy that." And Whisper, Cross's voice carried a note of warmth. "Good hunting." The team advanced. Soraya tracked their movement through her scope, watching for threats, calculating angles, preparing for whatever came next. The compound loomed ahead, silent and still. Too still, perhaps. But the intelligence had been solid this time. Triple verified. No one was taking chances anymore. Not after what happened to Halstead. She had heard the news 2 weeks ago. His court-martial had concluded with a conviction on all charges. Dereliction of duty, negligent endangerment, conduct unbecoming. He had been stripped of his rank, his pension, his legacy. He would spend the next 15 years in Leavenworth. A cautionary tale for every officer who forgot that their duty was to the men and women under their command, not to their own ambition. Soraya had not attended the sentencing. She had not needed to. Justice had been served. That was enough. The SEAL team reached the compound wall. Soraya watched them stack up, prepare for breach. Her finger rested alongside the trigger guard, ready but not eager. She hoped this operation would be clean, hoped she would not need to fire a single round. But if she did, she would not hesitate. She would never hesitate again. Breach, breach, breach. The team leader's voice crackled over the radio. Flashbangs detonated. The SEALs poured through the door. Gunfire erupted inside the compound, sharp and brief. Then silence. Target secured, the team leader reported. No friendly casualties. Package is in custody. Soraya let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Clean. It was clean. Good work, everyone, Commander Cross said. Extraction inbound. Whisper, nice overwatch. You can stand down. Copy that, actual. Whisper, standing down. She rolled on her back and stared up at the endless sky. The sun was fully up now, painting the clouds in shades of gold and pink. Beautiful. She had forgotten how beautiful the world could be when she was not looking at it through a scope. Vashchenko sat up beside her, stretching her neck. Another successful operation. At this rate, you're going to run out of medals to receive. Soraya smiled. I did not do anything this time. Just watched. Exactly. That is the goal, is it not? To be so good at what we do that we never have to pull the trigger. Soraya considered that. Maybe. But I would rather have the option and not need it than need it and not have it. Vashchenko laughed. Spoken like a true sniper. They gathered their equipment and began the long descent from the ridge. The extraction helicopters were already visible in the distance, black specks against the blue sky. Another mission complete. Another team safe. Another day where the right choices had been made. As they walked, Soraya thought about the dinner she had shared with the Tesoro family last month. Maria had made her grandmother's lasagna. The kids, Tommy and Sophia, had peppered her with questions about being a sniper. Dom had sat at the head of the table, his wound fully healed now, watching his family with a contentment that made Soraya's heart ache with something close to joy. You gave us this, Maria had whispered as Soraya left that night. You gave us everything. We will never forget. Soraya had not known what to say. She still did not. Some gifts were too large for words. The helicopter touched down, and she climbed aboard with Vashchenko. As they lifted off, she looked out the window at the mountains falling away below. Somewhere down there, enemies plotted and planned. Somewhere, good men and women put themselves in harm's way to protect others. And somewhere, a commander was making decisions that would determine who lived and who died. She could not control all of that, could not save everyone, could not make every choice the right one. But she could be ready. She could be vigilant. She could be the whisper in the darkness that protected those who could not protect themselves. That was enough. That would always be enough. If this story moved you, drop a comment and share your thoughts. Tell us about your favorite moment. Or share if you know someone who showed the courage to do what was right even when it cost them everything. And if you have served, or if someone you love has served, we thank you. Your sacrifice is never forgotten. The helicopter banked toward home, and Commander Soraya Okafor closed her eyes, finally at peace.